So this is the first video for the finishing workshop, and I'm going to demonstrate the mattress stitch seam. And you can also see by my swatches the difference that it makes having one swatch that is blocked and one swatch that isn't. So before I even start, it's quite easy for you to see how much easier it is to sew up a garment when all the pieces have been blocked. Okay. So first of all, we're going to start with the the join, the figure of 8 join. My mind went blank there. Okay. So the figure of 8 join is just a way of getting the bottom of your knitting even. And so what we're going to do is we're going to separate the end stitch from the second stitch. All the mattress stitch and everything takes place by removing that end stitch here. You can see up the edge, and by picking up the bars that lie between that end stitch and the next stitch. And the figure of 8 start is just the same. So I'm going to find the very first loop right down at the base, and I'm always working from the top. I'm going to pull my yarn through that first loop. Then I'm going to go across to the other side, find that first loop on the right hand swatch and pick up that loop there. Now you can see, if I uncurl that when I pull this, when I go back into this section here, I go back into the same hole and over that loop again. Now you'll see how it gets the name of the figure of 8 join. You can see there's your figure of 8. It's lying sideways, but it's your figure of 8. So that's how I'm going to start, by pulling that together to get those bottom edges even. And now we start the mattress stitch seam. So my yarn is coming from the left hand side, so the first thing I'm going to do is go to the right hand side and pick up 2 bars from the right hand side piece. Then I take the yarn across to the left hand piece. My needle goes into exactly the same place that the yarn is coming out of from the previous pass, and I'm going up 2 bars, which you can see there. It's a bit like a lacing effect. I'm not going to pull it tight. Needle goes back in to where the yarn comes out from the previous pass, up 2 bars, which you can see there. Back to the other side. Needle is inserted where the yarn comes out from the previous pass, and up 2 bars, which you can see there. And that's basically all there is to it. In where the yarn is coming out from the previous pass, up 2 bars, across to the other side, in where the yarn comes out, up 2 bars, like so. Then when we want to pull, we just have to hold the tail and pull. You can see you have an almost invisible seam. I'll work on this quickly. I'm using double knit weight yarn, which is fine to use 2 bars for each pass. If you're using a thick yarn, I would recommend that you only use 1 bar. So by the time you go up to maybe iron weight and thicker, and especially chunky or super chunky, just take 1 bar, which is equivalent to 1 row at a time, and that'll help to make the seam a bit more stable. There we go. Pull it tight. Give it a wee tug. You don't want to pull it super, super tight. As you can see, On those occasions that you might run out of yarn before you've sewn up, you can see by the invisibility of this method that you could actually use another yarn to sew up the garment. So, you know, if you have to resort to a colour that isn't exactly the same, it's not going to be a problem. Also, if you are working with a yarn that might be quite fluffy or maybe quite weak, then you could use another yarn to sew it up that is a little stronger or a little less fluffy, which might also help to make the sewing easier. So I'm just going to carry on up the seam, taking the 2 bars. And that's pretty much all there is to it. Now I tend to use this method of sewing in pretty much all my knitting, or a variation of it, I would say. It might not be exactly the same, but the lacing effect is the same. So there we go, pull that up, and there you go. You've got a lovely, nice seam.